Hi, it's Paul Guppy with the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular update about what is going on in Olympia and what new laws and taxes and bills are going to affect all of us across the state in the years ahead. The biggest thing is that the legislature has adjourned, of course, and now the governor's deadline, May 20th, has passed, in which he had to either veto, sign, or even line item veto some parts of bills. So that is all wrapped up, and now we know what final legislation has been passed. And here's a quick rundown of what we think are the most important issues. Number one, of course, is the budget. I should say massive budget for 25-27, two-year budget to fund the state. It's an increase to $78 billion, the largest budget that has ever been passed in Washington state history. That's up from about $72 billion in the last budget, and includes lots of new taxes. And in fact, even news media is admitting up front, even the Seattle Times reports that this is the largest tax increase in state history. So that's really crossing a milestone, because Governor Gregoire, Governor Locke, Governor Inslee, they all passed huge tax increases, which are in place today and which we are paying. And now on top of that, Governor Ferguson, in his first budget out of the box, despite his running on saying that taxes were, quote, a last resort, has signed the largest tax increase in history. So this repeats a pattern that we have seen in the past. It also explains why the state has a two-year budget cycle, because lawmakers and the governor can then put huge tax increases in place in odd-numbered years, like 2025, and put it as far away as possible from when the voters get to have their weigh in November of 2026. So odd-numbered years are when the pain of new taxes are imposed on the public, and even-numbered years are when the voters get to have their say. Lawmakers, of course, who voted for this, and the governor who signed it, are hoping that people will forget. So that's why we're doing a summary right now, just so we know where we are starting off. So the Seattle Times headline struck me as funny. They said, Ferguson complicit in largest tax increase in state history. And I thought, that's an odd term. The chief executive of the state, he's not complicit in it. His signature makes it happen. So he is signing the largest tax increase. I don't know why they engaged in wordplay there. Overall, the bill has $9.4 billion in new taxes over 4 years. Big increase in B&O taxes across the board, expanding the sales tax to more services, a maximum property tax increase. One estimate is that the average working family in Washington state will pay up to $2,000 more in state taxes due to this budget. At the same time, the state is expanding its spending. So they're engaging in overspending well beyond what their predicted revenues were in the past. And they use that to justify a tax increase. So where does that money go? Well, number one is state unions are going to get a pay raise, plus Cadillac health care benefits, plus a traditional high-dollar pension. Those all go to unionized state workers, in addition to expansion in other programs. The governor did say, hopefully in his speech, this was positive for us, that he was not interested in defending government, that he was going to reform the government. That was 4 months ago, 5 months ago. And yet the bill he signs is really very much a business as usual budget with a big expansion. So no structural changes, no reform. It's standard programs in place, plus spending more money and higher taxes. Representative Barkas, who's the lead among the Republicans had offered a balanced budget within current revenues, no new taxes. Democrats voted that down. So the top Republican representative on the budget, he said that he's warning of an ever-increasing tax burden that is being put on the residents of our state. And that feeds back to what I mentioned about the ratchet effect over time. Tax increases are put in place on top of the burden that we are already paying. And so that's where things stand on the budget. There are lots of details, long lists of new levies that are being put in place, but the overall burden is definitely going up. And as we have pointed out before, none of these higher taxes are necessary. The budget could have been completely funded under current services, existing safety net programs, social programs, vital public services, all with the rising revenue that we were already receiving. And yet there was this narrative that we face a budget crisis and a shortfall, and that was the story that was put forward to the public to enact these tax increases. Going forward, we will see what impact that has on our state. At Washington Policy Center, our prediction is that as the rest of the country enters a golden era, a good economy, however you want to put it. Congress is about to pass a major tax cut bill, along with other restructured spending at the federal level, which could really spark an economic boom in our country. Our feeling is Washington State and some other states, California and others, will be left behind to a certain extent, that we will not participate in the same national prosperity that is likely to happen over the next couple of years. We'll see how that plays out. Another bill that I noticed that the governor partially vetoed is the expanded clemency and pardons bill. This is HB 1131. It doubles the number of people who are on the pardons board from 5 to 10, and that part is okay. But the law requires that at least one person on the board now be a person with experience as an incarcerated individual. In other words, somebody who has been in prison is now going to be considering pardons for other people as part of the state pardons board. The part that the governor vetoed was some funding measure. He vetoed that, saying, quote, "We can't afford it." Again, that struck me. Well, you just passed $9 billion in new taxes. Why can't you afford funding this, the expansion of this board? They will find funding for it later on. And the other direction to the board was criminals can now be released based on not just details of their case, but a general direction that it is in the interest of justice. And again, you look at that language and you're like, what does that mean? So this pardons board can pretty much come up with any reason that they like to let a criminal out of prison. It's a huge expansion in releasing people from jail. And again, we'll see what that does to the crime rate. Next is the governor did push ahead and signed HB 1296. This is the rollback of parental rights that the voters had. Hundreds of thousands of people signed a petition for this. The Democrats and Republicans passed it last year, and then now here they're rolling it back. So that process caused me to kind of stop and think, like, what was this entire exercise for if all they're going to do is to water down what the public wants? And I think the reason for that looks like a double cross to me. That is to say, last year, big election year, 2024, the legislature just accepts the parental rights bill that came from voters, passes it, all with the knowledge that they're going to return and repeal it later on after the election is over. And that's exactly where we are today. They accepted the Citizens Initiative in 2024, and now they're rolling it back in 2025. And our persistent education analyst, Vicki Murray, has pointed out that the bill will likely lead to further cuts in enrollment in public education and will hurt academic progress. And the reason for that is it just simply adds more woke social controversy to public education. This bill was pushed very hard by hardliners. It had nothing to do with the quality of the education. It's said to be for safety of students, which actually just divides them from their primary caregivers, which is parents. So you could argue it makes students less safe, but what it definitely doesn't do is contribute to the academic standing and quality of the schools. Therefore, families are looking elsewhere. And that leads to a next point that I noticed when I was kind of flipping through the channels on cable. And of course, there are these public interest channels. And sure enough, I stumble across a Seattle school board meeting. And what, in their convoluted bureaucratic language, what are these board members bemoaning? And that is declining enrollment in Seattle schools. And they are struggling with reintroducing some form of limited choice, which Seattle used to have among public schools. They're never going to let people choose outside the system, but they're thinking about even returning some choice within the system. Before I drifted off to sleep because of how boring this topic was, that you could see the signal was that even left-leaning Seattle system, which is the most calcified and bureaucratic school system in the state, and also the most ideological, was even waking up to minimal market forces that families are starting to leave the system. I see this as an early bellwether in Washington State that there is no way to insulate politically or ideologically from the larger choice demand movement, which is happening across the country. Dozens of states have now moved towards providing broader private school choice, public school choice, charter schools, education savings accounts. These are all popular tools that are being enacted in other states. They have been frozen out of Washington State because of the power of our monopoly union. But this board meeting that I came across, as grinding and sleepy as it was, you could kind of read between the lines that even they see that popular pressure is moving in that direction. So I would look for some wider forms of choice to be available in our state as we move forward. Next is the governor signed a new gas tax transportation bill with a lot of moving parts. That was SB 5801. And I just did some quick math to add up where we are. So there's about 18 cents in federal gas tax. There's 40 cents of the Inslee energy tax. The state tax is about 49 cents right now. You add all those together. Plus the new bill that Ferguson signed adds 6 cents to a gallon of gasoline in our state. So you put all that together and you can see that a large proportion of what we pay at the pump is not the commercial market price of buying the product. A lot of it is the gas tax, which then ripples through the entire economy because it's an energy tax and makes everything more expensive. So we know that that's coming. Next, they did a clever device that policymakers like to do in order to avoid accountability. They made the gas tax have automatic 2% increases into the future, supposedly to account for inflation. But this is to avoid having to vote every time it raised the gas tax. They know that's unpopular. So now there's going to be an automatic mechanism where every year the gas tax in our state is going to go up by 2%, pretty much regardless of what's happening with the economy. And that just creates automatic revenue for them. They raised a bunch of other taxes. The sales tax on cars went from 3% to 5%. They added an 8% surcharge on high value cars. They doubled the rental car tax from about 6% to 12%. These are all rounded numbers that I'm using, but the point of that list is to show just how pervasive the increase in the taxes that the governor signed. Senator Elias, who's the very left-wing Democrat lead on transportation, he said, we need more money in order to keep our promises, maintaining roads, maintenance, construction, which is what the public expects. But I saw that statement and I said, well, what about the funding that you've received already? I mean, we've been paying taxes all along, revenues are going up, and now you tell us you need to keep your promises? Why didn't you keep your promises before? So this is the same story that we hear time and again. We're passing a tax increase so we can deliver the public services that we promised. And you're thinking like, well, I have been paying taxes. What happened to that money? And that's the same framing that they're using. I thought it was interesting that the Democrats had put a $1 per ticket fee on sporting events, highly unpopular. They rolled that back. It's like, okay, the public doesn't want it. And then what do? Turn around and raise weight fees in order to make up for it. So the dollar revenue in the bill is going to come out one way or another. They're going to collect that money. And then another policy change I noticed was they clearly want to add more tolling to State Route 520 across Lake Washington. They're already tolling the bridge. And now they're going to add tolls in the future. The reason I say that is because they authorized a study, and lawmakers only asked for a study in order to prepare public opinion for a policy change that they wanted to make. They could add tolling right now, but they're too nervous to do that. So we're going to have a study for a couple of years, and then they'll come out and say, time for more tolling across the state. Lastly, I'll just mention about quick update I got from the phlegmatic but highly informed Charles Prestrud on our staff, who knows everything about transportation, Sound Transit, and light rail. I asked him for a quick update about how light rail is doing. Apparently now Sound Transit is saying that service to Bellevue for light rail would not be in service until, quote, early 2026. When light rail was authorized by voters back in, having been defeated earlier, and then finally it passed in 2008, the promise was that light rail would go to Bellevue in the year 2020. We are way past that deadline. Now we're being told that it's a couple of years in the future. Charles also pointed out to me that Sound Transit as an agency no longer gives the public deadlines as to when projects will be finished because they always miss the deadline. So now you get vague terms like sometime early in 2026. To me, that indicates a lack of accountability and precision in the work that they do. They don't give start dates anymore for service because they always turn out to be wrong. The other thing that struck me about that effect was On the one hand, we hear that science can perfectly predict what's going to happen with global climate over the next couple of decades, even 100 years from now. And yet a public agency with a huge tax base and budget can't tell you the day that a new rail line is going to open. So there's a real dichotomy there. What this boils down to is explaining why the public feels that government is so ineffective. It's not able to deliver the services that are promised. And yet at the same time, whenever an organization like the Washington Policy Center says, let's make government more efficiency, let's reduce the tax burden, let's cut regulations and that prevent the effective use of money, we're told that we're cutting services, we're throwing people out into the streets, we're doing terrible things. And yet it's the agencies themselves that are not able to deliver on their promises. So we think they should work on that, rebuild confidence and trust with the government, and then people will feel better about the financial burden that our state leaders put on us. That's the bigger picture. With that, I'll wrap up and be back in the future with another update. Thanks for listening.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.